Now you may be wondering yourself, how do we get these onion heads, or how do people get these big onion heads? And I thought I would go ahead and I went through some of my videos today, some of them published, some of them not, but I thought I'd break it down into a simple language that you can go ahead and do right now for the up and coming season. Selection of seed is probably one of the most important items that you can go with. You want to make sure that you find a variety, not necessarily what the supermarkets and the home supply stores are currently selling. They're selling what is popular with folks. You want to try to find some varieties that will work for you in your area, and that takes a little bit of time, but you can do that throughout each year, or by ordering multiple varieties and trying different varieties within the same year. That's certainly, Delia and I are always adding a variety or two to try, and we evaluate it at the end of the year, and we can decide whether we want to reorder that. Was it successful? Did it store well? Did it taste good? Things like that. So those are things that you can go ahead and do. So we want to make sure we talk about there is a difference between varieties. And just because the supermarket has it doesn't mean that that's probably the best variety in your area. It just happens to sell well for your area. Now, the next thing I want to talk about, and this is the most important thing, is having your soil ready and amended to grow good big onions. Now, you can't go in with a heavy clay soil with as much success, let me put it that way, and grow big onions. The onions when it comes to the bulbing stage, the bulb needs to be able to grow. So you don't want to have an onion that's encapsulated into the clay. So if you do, there's some things you need to, if you have just a hard clay and that type of thing, try to amend it with some heavy compost. It may take you a few years to get that organic matter built into the soil. I tell you, I mean, the onion grows in soil, but the amendments adds to the nutrition of the plant, and it also adds to the ability for this plant to grow. It can open itself up. Hard clay, rocky soils would not be an ideal location to grow a big onion. So let's think about that to begin with. Generally speaking, onions are grown in very sandy soils or very loose type soils, peat and sand and things along that line, or a heavy organic soil out there. So you want to look at what you have to begin with to start out with. The second thing is, make sure you go ahead, get a good soil test for your garden, send it off, and find out where you're starting from and what you need to add to the soil to amend it. Most of these reports you get back after your soil test will talk about per 1,000 feet of row. So if it says to add 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 feet of row for onions, then you're in good shape. That's what you got to do, 1 pound of urea. So something like that, you can do that. So whatever your soil needs, make sure you take care of that before you ever plant any of your vegetables. And that goes with everything out there. The next thing I can tell you that onions need is they need a lot of water. So you want to set yourself up to where these plants can get a lot of water through the growing season. Delia and I use a drip tape. We'll plant our onions every 6 inches apart with 4 individual rows within a 30-inch bed. Basically, it's a lasagna bed is what it is. If you need to know that information, look up how to make lasagna beds for gardening on YouTube, and you're going to find a lot of examples out there. So we're going to plant 4 rows within 1 lasagna bed, and in between each 2 seedlings of onions, we're going to also plant, or we're going to lay some drip tape between those 2 rows. That's very, very important that you do. They need a lot of water, and I can just tell you right now the onions need a lot of nitrogen. They love nitrogen. That's important. You know, every one of those leaves that pop up on an onion, what that does is that produces another ring on our onion. You want to get yourself up close to that 13 leaves per onion plant as much as you can, and that'll give you some nice big onions in there. You can get more leaves than that, but that being said, that's generally what I get excited about. When I'm sitting there at 8, 9 leaves or something like that, I'm probably not going to get as big of onion. Matter of fact, I know I'm not going to get as big of onion just because I don't have as many leaves. I don't have as many rings to build that up. So they do love their nitrogen. So let's start out with next. We have our soil properly amended. We have the right fertilizer in there. We have our water taken care of. That's very important. So now then, we're ready to plant the plants. In the first video, we have Delia going to show you exactly how we plant our onions. And a lot of these videos show onions, these seedlings, being planted very, very shallow, like this little ink pen right here, and there's your little roots down here at the clicker at the bottom of the ink pen. And we used to begin following some of these leads of just barely planting the seed in there, but we realized that where we live in Kansas, that we had a lot of problems with some wind blowing out our little seedlings. So we learned that we could actually plant that seedling down an inch, get it in the ground, and we're okay. But before we can even plant, we need to decide what type of onion are we going to plant. You can start from seed. It's going to take much longer. Some of the bigger companies will go out there in the wintertime, say down in Arizona and Texas, and they'll plant their onion seed and in the fall, and it'll grow in through the winter because they're warmer months. It's temperate where they're at. And, they're going to grow the whole growth, and they'll have this wonderful onion at the end of that from seed on. And that's probably your most economical way of doing it. We don't do that here. I don't want to do that here. The other choices are for Delia and I, seeing how we're not growing them from seed, except for green onions. We'll do it for green onions. The next way of growing onions is either through a bulb or a started seedling. Now, the bulb is a 2-year plant, and I used to do this with a lot. I used to put a lot of bulbs in the ground, and I could never get the thing to want a bulb. They always kept wanting to go to seed. Well, the reason is it's a 2-year plant, and I want to tell you, you can snap the tops off to force it. As soon as you start to see that seed head, you can snap the tops off to try to convince it to go to put its energy towards the bulb and that type of thing. But it's a lot easier, I believe, just to buy a bunch of seedlings. Usually it's around 30 to 100 seedlings in a rubber band, and you'll find that at your greenhouse supply, your farm stores, your home supply stores, Lowe's and Menards and things like that. Home Depot, they'll have those types of things. Now, they're probably going to have what sells best in the area because everybody in that area has been buying those. So the varieties they're going to give you is they're going to get those for you. Now, what Delia and I actually buy and where we buy is actually from a company called Dixondale Farms. They're out of Texas. They have a lot more varieties than you've ever heard of, I guarantee you. And you got to buy in certain varieties, you need to buy 4 bundles, or you need to buy a case, or some of them you can mix and match and things like that. But if you love to have good onions and you want a little wider variety, Dixondale Farms is a wonderful source for you to go ahead and look up. I'd say probably many market gardeners like ourselves probably buy most of our onion sets from a company like Dixondale Farms. They're top drawer in our book. There is a range, so some varieties you might have 50. They'll guarantee you so many seedlings in a rubber band, but it is what it is there on that. So we do go ahead and buy the seedling. And the reason we want to go with the seedling is it's a 1 year plant. That's from seed, and we're just getting it. That plant is interested in bulbing. That's very important. That seedling is interested in bulbing. And again, in the first video, Delia is going to show you how we plant these plants in our good tilted ground. And we go a good inch deep. We make sure there that it's planted deep enough for the wind. Now, if you're in an area that you don't have to have the wind and that you don't have to deal with the wind, you can plant it shallower than us. But where we live in Kansas, we need to make sure that we have good loose soil, so high organic matter in our case. We don't have a high sand content, but we do have, that area has a high organic material area where we supplemented that ground with a lot of compost, and we add to that through the years, so that way it stays good. Now, the next thing about this is we're going to make sure we have a water line between each 2 rows, and we're going to do that way we can add the water. Now, the timing of fertilizer is very important when it comes to growing onions. You want to go ahead and you're going to start with a good fertilizer in this ground, whether you're using commercial fertilizers such as 10-10-10 or whatever the case may be. In this case, you may want to be going with a 20-10-10 or a 30-10-10 for onions, because they're like a grass. They grow very fast, and we're interested in putting on leaves. We're putting on rings on our onion, but you want to go and start out with your soil amended. But then once you start to see that onion plant start to push up that new growth, that new leaf, that's the time we're going to start introducing a little bit of nitrogen in small amounts. I run it through my water system. I use a liquid fertilizer that's like a 20-20-20. I'll start that out to begin with, 20-20-20, and then I start moving over to a pure urea based fertilizer, and I'm adding that to the water system. So that way, and I have a YouTube video. I'll put it in the link in the description that I talk about how I do that with water, how much fertilizer I mix per in my rows and things like that. So those are things that I think you can do as well. There's one more item that Delia and I learned in this past year, and it was a surprise to both of us. But it turned out we were growing the very best onions we ever grew in our life. They're nice, they're big, they're huge. Now, we've grown big onions, doing it the way directly into the soil, as you've seen Delia planting these onions. But you're also going to see onions grown under plastic. And more importantly, let me at least say this. We started putting plastic down with a plastic mulch layer. You can do this by hand as well, but we started, you can use woven fabric. You can do whatever you want. I think my sister Teresa and brother-in-law use woven fabric. They already have the rows burn out where where they're going to plant their onions. I can tell you this, that without a doubt, we grew the best onions in the world and the fastest growing onions, and the biggest recipient of these onions out of everything. The big onions grew big regardless. They maybe grew faster, but more importantly is our small seedlings, those little tiny, I'm going to call it like a little pasta hair, angel hair pasta, these real little tiny seedlings that get also added to your bundle of seedlings. The biggest thing is those guys not only survived, but they thrived in that. With that added bonus heat, these little seedlings were able to take off. You're on a 50-degree day or 45-degree sunny day in the springtime, and normally those little seedlings would just sit there in the normal soil, not under plastic. That plastic sitting there, and that plastic sitting there, and it's absorbing that heat. It's warming that soil up. It's telling that little seedling, go ahead, buddy, go ahead and get growing. And once we started growing them in plastic, I've never seen onions grow so fast in my life. I think it's a big bonus to you, especially if you're just trying to, especially in the springtime. That's the biggest benefit of the year. Woven fabric. If you bought yourself and laid out some woven fabric and burned the holes out and could use it from year to year to year, I think you're going to be very happy. Plus, you keep the weeds down between the rows, which is always a problem. So what you want to do is go ahead and lay your drip lines underneath the fabric and line it all up, and then turn right around and plant your onions in the burnout holes, or in Delia and I's case, we're using plastic. So we just go ahead and poke a hole through there. I actually made a jig that I could sit there and go down and punch holes through the plastic to maintain my spacing on there. So either way you do it, you're going to be successful at it. I hope you enjoy these videos. I'm going to show you Delia at one stage. I'm going to show you the last current year with how the onions looked in the field. I've never seen anything like it. The last thing I'm going to say is, when do you harvest the onions? Very simply put, is when I seen the onions start to bend over, I go ahead and I pull that onion out. That onion's ready to be harvested. That's the best way to tell when to harvest an onion, is when it can no longer support its top. Some guys will go ahead and trim the tops, and that's something that Delia and I haven't done. But I'm telling you, folks, just stick to the basics. Fertilizer, a well-amended soil, loose soil. Make sure you have a lot of water. Once you start seeing the new leaves appear on your seedlings, go ahead and start adding nitrogen fertilizer once a week. Then turn right around and continue to water. The hotter it gets, especially if you get those first early 90-degree days, make sure you go ahead and you add a lot of water, because you don't want to burn up them young seedlings in the year. So we do water pretty heavy to cool that soil down, to keep the plants going in that first parts of summer. But once them plants get established, they're going and they can handle that 90 to 100 degree heat, just like ours was. And believe me, we get up into the 90s and 100s in our summer as well. Just keep them watered. They're going to grow. They're going to keep doing fine. Add that nitrogen once a week. You're going to have the biggest onions you ever grew in your life, just like Delia and I did. Until we meet again, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe. Come grow with us.
Today we're going to start planting our onions. We're going to start with the Superstar. They are a white onion, and we sorted them out yesterday with our bigger ones and our smaller ones. And I'll plant the bigger ones first. And we're going to do 4 rows and 4 per row, and it's a 30-inch bed, and we have like a 12-inch between our rows. And then the next variety, I'm going to start with the smaller ones, so that don't compete with each other as far as nutrients and whatever else is. I'm planting them about 1 inch down, a little shallow but not too bad, because we are very windy in this area, and last year we did have onions that we had to keep replanting, because when we had the winds they would get ripped out.
My very best onion crop I've ever had. I mean, it's just phenomenal. These are going to be huge. I'm pulling out big onions out of that area that have fallen over. These are, I sent out a kind of a Facebook picture of me holding onions out of this spot, and this is what that came out of. And those are big onions. What I'm doing early, and some of these are, see how they're falling over. They're still falling over every day, but I'm pulling the ones that are leaning over, and that's what we're marketing right now, and just getting those out of the way. But right now it's just about at a stage where I just need to about pull everybody. But I want to get as much growth out of our green beans as I possibly can. Or out of our onions as much as I can, so that I want them to bulb. I want them to get as much green growth and continue to make as much of an onion. People like big onions. That's the way it is. They don't mind the smaller onions and stuff, but I tell you, when I put them in the booth, I will outsell on big onions when I'm presenting both small, medium, large, average, whatever you want to call it. They're going to grab a big onion. That seems to be the way it is. That's okay. That's what we want to grow. So that's why I'm letting those sit as long as we can.